when you say yes to everything or chronically people please, most people aren't going to shut that down. And so people end up doing it more. And it starts to tip over into maladaptive. And so that's what we want to look at, is not how do we get rid of all of these qualities, because they can really be helpful a lot of the time. But you want to think of it as like a knife, where it can cut you or it can serve you. And we want to figure out how to make this work for us. And then how do we address where it's hurting us?
Welcome back to another episode of Like Mind, Like Body, where we explore healing from chronic pain, symptoms, and conditions using a mind-body approach. I'm Christy Weepy, psychotherapist and founder of the Better Mind Center, where our team treats chronic symptoms one-on-one. Many people who struggle with chronic pain and symptoms eventually hear about the so-called mind-body personality traits, like perfectionism, conscientiousness, people-pleasing, and holding themselves to incredibly high standards. But what if these traits aren't simply personality characteristics? What if they reflect something deeper about how a person's nervous system is wired? In today's episode, we're exploring the concept of biotemperament and a particular temperament known as overcontrol. We'll talk about why people with chronic symptoms are so often responsible, driven, and self-disciplined, how those strengths can sometimes become vulnerabilities, and why healing often involves learning how to create genuine feelings of safety and connection, rather than simply thinking our way out of fear. Before I introduce our guest, a reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Curable, the #1 app for chronic pain and symptoms. Curable is an online program built with leading pain experts and backed by the latest pain science, designed to help you better understand why pain persists and guide you toward lasting relief. If you're dealing with pain or symptoms that won't go away, join more than 1 million people who have found relief with the help of Curable, and get started with a 2-week free trial today. Our guest today is Danielle Szasz, LMFT, founder of the Wise Mind Group. Danielle specializes in helping people recover from chronic pain, anxiety, burnout, and other nervous system-based conditions. Her work integrates pain reprocessing therapy, attachment-based approaches, and radically open DBT, a treatment model developed specifically for people with overcontrolled temperaments. Danielle, I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you. It's so good to be here.
So many people in the mind-body world are familiar with descriptions like perfectionist, people-pleaser, type A, high achiever, but you have a way of exploring the mechanisms underneath these labels that can be tremendously helpful to patients. So I'd love to hear, what do you think we're actually seeing when we talk about the mind-body personality?
Yes, that is such a great question. So having done this work for many years now, I guess about 14 years, I think we're all sort of familiar with this neuroplastic pain personality type, right? Of, okay, what do people with neuroplastic pain tend to be like? We're often people pleasers. We often are very conscientious. They're really often very good parts of being somebody who was wired like this. But I became more and more curious over time of, is there something deeper happening that is kind of at the root of this presentation? And I came across something, what they call overcontrolled biotemperament. And this is based on the work of somebody named Dr. Thomas Lynch. And it's also based on the work of Stephen Porges, if you're familiar with that, of polyvagal theory. And it is this idea that we have 5 nervous system states. And so those states are, the first one is social safety. And so when you're in social safety, that's when you are feeling safe and calm in your body. Your vision literally widens when you're feeling safe. Actually, even the muscles in your ears shift so that you're able to hear better, particularly conversation. So, social safety. Then there is what's called novelty. And that's when, okay, there's something new in the environment. I don't know yet if it's good or bad, but I'm just noticing, there's something happening here and I'm paying attention to it. And I should say one thing that's interesting to know about these states is that it's a bit like a radio dial where they're not being activated all at once ever. One's activated and the others are turned off. Okay? And this is super helpful to understand this framework in terms of neuroplastic pain, because with neuroplastic pain, we're often chronically in what's called threat state. So threat, that's when our breathing is more shallow, our bodies are tenser, our vision tends to actually literally narrow. And for those of us who have this predisposition to develop neuroplastic symptoms, this tends to be our kind of default state. We have what's called a higher threat sensitivity. So there are those ones. There's reward, which is, okay, there's something I really want. I'm moving towards it. What's interesting about people with neuroplastic pain or symptoms, our reward system is weaker. So it takes more of a good thing to make us feel good. And you're nodding. Like, is that relatable? I feel like when I learned about this framework, it was so validating, because I think it's so easy to think, is there something wrong with me? Like, why is my startle response like this? Or why do I tend to be fearful of new, or kind of suspicious of maybe new things? And to kind of have more understanding of, okay, there's actually a biotemperament piece here that's in play. And then the last one is overwhelm. And that's when we've been in that kind of threat state for so long that our body just sort of, and our nervous system kind of pulls the plug. And that's when you're like, I can get out of bed. And this is just all too much.
Okay.
So that's kind of the 5 states. And thinking about neuroplastic symptoms, like I said, those of us who have a predisposition to developing those, part of what I think is in play is, we have a higher threat sensitivity.
Okay. Danielle, I'm so excited you're here. I literally just dove right in with you because I'm so excited to get as much as I can out of this conversation. And for listeners to know, Danielle and I go way back. We were colleagues together at the Pain Psychology Center years ago. We've both gone on to open our own practices and do our own things and have remained in touch both as friends and as colleagues. So I'm living for my opportunity to dive in with you, quote unquote, just as a clinician, because I love the way that you think about things. And I already have 100 follow-up questions on what you've said so far.
Great. You can tell I'm like so jazzed. I love talking about this and nerding out about it.
First, can you just name those 5 states again in order?
Yeah. So now that I've kind of given you the deeper dive of them, so then the 5 states would be social safety, reward, novelty, threat, and overwhelm.
Okay. And we're bringing up this biotemperament piece to help understand why or how many people with chronic pain seem to share a certain type of personality. This is a way for you to say there has to be something about how we're wired that leaves us predisposed to putting a lot of pressure on ourselves and being perfectionistic and conscientious. And this is something that helps you understand the why underneath that. Am I getting that right?
That's exactly right. Where I think, like you said, you and I both have been doing this for such a long time that it can be Well, I would say like that most of the people we see there tend to be very curious people and want to understand themselves and want to understand why am I how I am. And I think how we have tended to speak about it is usually there's something that happened in your early life that probably shaped this. And I think that that's often true. And what I would say is that you and I are both parents. I think when you become a parent, you start to see, oh, it's so fascinating that our children also kind of come into the world wired in a certain way. And then our home environment can reinforce some of those tendencies, right?
Makes so much sense to me. And I've shared this with you before. I distinctly remember this somewhere in my own recovery journey when I was learning about pain reprocessing therapy and understanding that my symptoms were brain generated. I literally went to my parents and I sat them down. And I said, I need to have a serious conversation with you. I'm like recognizing that all of the symptoms I've been telling you about for a decade are actually caused by my brain and nervous system dysregulation. And there's something you're hiding from me. I said this to them. And
Totally.
I really believed it. I was like, I'm ready to hear it. Just tell me what happened. What happened? They were like, what are we doing here? We're not keeping anything from you. But I really resonate with that idea of feeling like it has to be something I went through. And this shift to understanding there's a big piece of this that is our wiring. And even the word biotemperament, Danielle, is new for me. I'm in love with that word.
Me too. I mean, I feel like learning about this, it felt like one of those kind of things where you learn it and you feel like almost like a weight lifting off of your shoulders where you're like, oh, this actually feels kind of like a relief, because I have certainly had so many clients where they get stuck in a similar loop, like what you're describing of, okay, I need to figure out what is the thing that happened that made me this way. And somehow I can't get better if I don't understand, like, what is the thing? And like making them, sort of like a thing on the wall of like, okay, this happened. Let me try to draw this connection. And I think just having this recognition of, oh, there is this biotemperamental piece where you think about human history, every tribe needed people like this who were really good at scanning for threat and thinking through all the different worst case scenarios of what might happen and planning for those things, delaying gratification. Those types of things, people with this biotemperament tend to have that in spades. And it can be, and often it's what makes us super successful at the things that we want to do.
Yes.
Right? Like,
it's so validating to even hear you say every tribe needed someone like
what?
this. And I will name like myself. I'm going to throw myself in that group, not surprisingly, as a chronic TMSer. I'm the worst backseat driver in the entire world. I will see a car merging like a football field away. I'm telling my husband, like, hey, just so you know, just so you're aware.
There's a car coming, the exit's coming up. You're going to have to get over in this lane, so start now.
Yes. But what you're saying is we actually can't help that. Like we are perceiving things at a higher level of threat sensitivity than people with different biotemperament.
Then somebody that's more, and you can even think of it like a bell curve, right? And let me give you an example. Many people are familiar with that marshmallow experiment. Do you know of it? This famous experiment where they took little kids in a room and said, okay, you're going to sit here at this table and here's one big marshmallow, but if you can wait for 15 minutes, you're going to get 2 marshmallows. People wired like this are really good at waiting and delaying the gratification. And when they did that research, it was longitudinal, where they looked at these people's success later in life. And outwardly, people like this do tend to be successful because they're good at planning. They're good at assessing risk. They're good at being conscientious. They almost are never going to say no to their boss. All these things. And you would think, okay, that maybe there's sort of like just this never ending upward trajectory of those things helping you. But actually, it's a bit more like a bell curve. And on the left end of the bell curve, there are people where you never have to guess how that person is feeling. Maybe you run into them in the grocery store and something difficult's happening. They are crying. They are social signaling for help, right? And those people often end up getting help because it's very clear that they need it. On the right side of the bell curve are people that are wired more like this, where they're actually become so good at regulating their emotions that sometimes people don't even know that they're having a hard time. Often people don't even know that they're having a hard time. And so the way that you want to think about it is many of these qualities of having this type of biotemperament, they've helped you become successful in life. But it is not the case that they come without cost. It can become maladaptive over time and it really is actually because so many of these things they are socially reinforced. You know, when you say yes to everything or chronically people please, most people aren't going to shut that down. And so people end up doing it more. And it starts to tip over into maladaptive. And so that's what we want to look at is not how do we get rid of all of these qualities, because they can really be helpful a lot of the time. But you want to think of it as like a knife where it can cut you or it can serve you. And we want to figure out how to make this work for us. And then how do we address where it's hurting us? Okay. And what's so amazing about pain is that it often can help us see where it's hurting us so that we can take action and start to address it. And without pain, most people don't, right? Like, why do you ever fix something unless you're in pain?
Right. It's the tell that something about the way that you've been operating is starting to cause harm to your system. But
That's
to your
right.
point, there are so many strengths of having this type
Totally.
of wiring. And just to try to pull, because a lot of this is new language for me. I'm imagining it might be new language for some of the listeners. If I'm pulling it together to check my understanding, people with our type of biotemperament, someone who's predispositioned to experience chronic pain, chronic anxiety, chronic symptoms, are existing in a state of threat, an actual state of threat. Their brain is operating from that mode more frequently or enters it at a lower threshold.
That's correct.
And there are tremendous benefits to that in terms of our ability to perceive risk, plan, achieve. There's also social benefits in terms of our ability to people please and read the room. We're great employees. We're great friends.
Yep.
And it comes at a cost to have your brain be operating from that state of threat in an accumulated way for days, weeks, months, or your lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that it's like so beneficial in many ways, but then over time, living in that chronic threat state can start to have some high costs.
Okay. Can I ask you something? Maybe you can help course correct me if it doesn't belong in this conversation, but there's something about this that feels similar to HSP, highly sensitive people, which is something I think our listeners have heard more frequently. That language feels like it's kind of transferred to the population, the general population. I hear that a lot. Like, I'm HSP, I have a highly sensitive personality. Is there any difference between this and a highly sensitive personality other than the language set? And I have to say the language set in and of itself feels very important. The biotemperament piece I take to, much more
Yeah.
readily than I take to the idea of a highly sensitive person. So I'm wondering if there's any other difference or if the language is what's different about it.
I think that it's mostly the language, and that it's more like this explains why some people are highly sensitive, right? Because I think my question has always been sort of like, why? Like, why do I seem to perceive things differently or experience certain sound, sensation, physical things in a different way than other people? And so this framework provides kind of a deeper explanation. Oh, across this spectrum of human diversity, some of us have this higher threat sensitivity, and that changes how our experience of what it's like to be human.
That makes sense. And it's a language change, but you're naming something important as well. It's mapping a clear why.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So I'd love to hear more about where you were going a moment ago. You were saying there are lots of benefits of this. These are adaptive strategies. We learned them for a reason. We use them for a reason. They can be helpful for lots of reasons, and at a certain point they can flip and be maladaptive. Can you tell me more about what that looks like, or how you see this show up with your clients, or the overlap between this accumulation of threat and a chronic symptom presentation?
Yeah. I mean, you can even think about it of, okay, somebody that has a higher threat sensitivity, their brains are definitely going to be more likely to interpret sensation as pain, right? Because they are just fundamentally more sensitive to threat. And if we think about pain or symptoms as our brain and nervous system's best attempt to try to protect us against threat by turning up the volume on a sensation, it makes so much sense that, okay, when we have this, our brains are going to be more likely to make a mistake in this respect. And you can think of it also like, okay, 10,000 years ago, somebody is sitting on the savannah and they hear rustling in the bushes, and you can make one of two mistakes there, right? One would be, it's probably nothing, but it's a tiger. And one would be, it's probably a tiger, but it's nothing. One of those ancestors, our genes, got passed on, right? The one that's more likely to make the mistake of, oh my God, there's danger everywhere. And we have to be on alert all the time because anything bad could happen.
Yeah. And there's something about what you're saying now that's reminding me of earlier in the conversation where you mentioned we come into the world with a certain biotemperament. We can see this in our kids. And often it's reinforced by events that we go through. I could imagine if someone is wired this way and is more likely to say it's a tiger when it's nothing, when they go through something that's actually really fear-inducing, a traumatic event, a loss, something out of their control, I would imagine there's tremendous reinforcement of their wiring.
Yes, that you could imagine different scenarios that might really enforce that. And one would be living in an environment where there is actually consistent threat, right? Where you're like, oh, it's very adaptive actually in a situation like that where, oh, you don't know what's going to set your parent off, or even just one shock trauma. But I think for many people, it's kind of that chronic developmental stuff that can be very reinforcing. So if there's a lot of unpredictability or volatility, that can really reinforce it. If the home environment, there's a lot of emphasis, say, on perfection, of it basically trying to stay safe through not ever making mistakes, that definitely can reinforce it. It's pretty fascinating that you're like, okay, actually a lot of different ways this could be reinforced, because and another one would just be culturally, right? Where it's like, if somebody grows up in a situation where maybe it's not even that much it's not even necessarily their home environment, but you even think about how much if they go to a really high pressure school, or maybe grow up in a religious community where it's like it's actually a lot of emphasis, it might be dangerous to not be perfect. Something really bad could happen. Those things could all reinforce like, wow, it's actually very important that you be very hyper vigilant to be looking for risk all the time, or potential danger.
Yeah, I'm curious how you talk to clients about this, because it comes up a lot for me with people I'm working with who are highly successful, really ambitious,
Yeah.
or proud of their jobs or their accomplishments, and feel really not only tied to their doing, tied to their productivity, but tied to the mechanisms that got them there. They
Yes.
feel a sense of credit is owed to their hypervigilance for their
Yes.
success. How do you work with that? How do you talk to clients about parsing out the good from the bad? Like, how do you help them feel motivated to change something that has been arguably legitimately beneficial for them?
That's what I love about this framework, because it's so validating, where of really recognizing, hey, there are aspects of this that have served us so well. Because I think when we kind of go to battle with our own nervous system, or kind of get in this narrative that there's something somehow wrong or bad about me, it's so hard to change. But the more that we can actually take in the full picture of, hey, this has actually served me so well in a lot of ways. And both things can be true, that it's coming at a cost. And I think helping people recognize, us looking at the root cause of this and kind of working on getting our nervous systems out of that threat mode, it does not have to mean that our success is, that it's going to totally cost our success, right? That actually this way of being, while aspects of us have served us well, it's not very sustainable. And that's what the pain can help show us, right? Of like, okay, it's gotten me this far, but it's not been without cost. And sometimes people who don't develop symptoms, it makes it so hard for them to assess the cost. And I think when you have symptoms, it's just this, it really helps kind of point you back to, yes, this way of motivating myself or of coping with life, it's been super helpful in certain ways, but it's also coming with a lot of cost.
Right. Can I ask you another question about the reinforcement piece?
Yeah.
Because you had mentioned this can be reinforced through scary, traumatic, difficult events someone's gone through. It's culturally reinforced. It can be reinforced by family, society. There was a piece you mentioned earlier about emotional regulation, our emotions being on a bell curve between people who let them freely out in the grocery store versus someone who is hyper controlled with their emotions. And at the time you had said people get too good at regulating their emotions to the point where others cannot recognize that they're happening. I heard in that can become more of emotional repression than anything else if we're at the far end of the bell curve. I'd like to hear more about that. And I'm curious if there's also reinforcement there, if our society reinforces people who can tighten the purse string, so to speak, on their feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah. That you think, okay, somebody who's able to really be extremely disciplined and sometimes even be able to fully disconnect from their emotional experience because they work in a really demanding profession or different things like that. You're like, of course that gets reinforced. And actually, it's the case that often people wired like this end up drawn to work that tends to reinforce those qualities exactly. What's interesting about it is that, and I noticed this myself, right? You know that I used to be a big firm litigator. Mm-hmm. And it's really helpful if you're a big firm litigator to be able to disconnect from your emotional experience. Because sometimes you're doing things that
Don't
can
feel
just
good.
be tough. You have to be tough, okay? And it absolutely gets reinforced of, oh, this is actually a really valuable thing to disconnect from your emotional experience and be able to like really tamp it down. And it starts to take on kind of a life of its own, where it's so common. I would imagine it is for you as well. Clients get so good at it that it's completely happening outside of their conscious awareness, and it's difficult to even access it. And it's a whole process of being able to reconnect with ourselves, help our nervous systems feel safe enough that we can reconnect with our emotional experience.
Absolutely. And it's so frustrating for clients. I hear so frequently people get so down on themselves. Like I know
Totally.
feeling my feelings would help me in my recovery, and I don't get it. I can't. It's happening so under their level of conscious awareness. It's so ingrained.
It's so ingrained, and people wired like this tend to engage in what's called approach coping, where this is reinforced as well, where we tend to be really good at thinking through and solving problems, right? And we then tend to try to take that approach into healing from neuroplastic symptoms. And that same intensity that's made us successful in other arenas, of course, we end up translating that into how we're approaching symptoms. And I think probably if anyone listening has experience with neuroplastic symptoms, you probably know how well that goes. Like, I'm just going to keep doing the thing that got me A pluses with my pain,
Yeah.
and then really end up hitting a wall because the brain that got us into this, we're not going to be able to think our way out or approach it in the same way. We're not going to be able to use that same intensity that's made us successful in other ways to be able to get out of pain. And obviously, it's actually quite the opposite, right?
That's why I love your way of explaining this. Why mapping the why underneath
Yeah,
all of these common ways of being is so important, because it takes so much blame out of it. As I've
totally.
asked myself this so many times. Why am I so jumpy? Why am I so anxious? Why am I so worried when no one else is? Why am I so intense? Once you develop an awareness of that way of relating and recognize this isn't helping my recovery, then you can weaponize that. Well, now I know I'm intense and I can't stop being intense. What is wrong? What's wrong with me? And you're mapping the why. It has served us first of all, it's how we came into the world. It's our
Yeah,
biotemperament, and it's been reinforced in a million ways.
totally. Totally. And my whole interest in having this framework, it is exactly what you said of it helps us have more compassion for ourselves to just see, oh, this isn't a fault thing. I couldn't actually be different than how I am right now. So, knowing that I'm wired in this way, how can I meet my nervous system where it is, understanding that it is going to be predisposed to this threat sensitivity, and what are the things that I can do not to think my way into safety, because I think that's what can often be hard about what we do. There's sort of this message of like, okay, so the pain is coming from your brain misperceiving threat. So you just need to tell yourself you're safe. And I think for a lot of people, that becomes super frustrating. And I think that's because we're trying to use our prefrontal cortex to tell our amygdala something. But those things are not directly connected. And it's really tough. And so a lot of this is around how do we do a bottom-up approach where we are actually showing our nervous system that we're safe through different somatic techniques versus trying to think our way into it. And it's that repeated experience of showing our nervous system that it's safe that helps it move more easily out of threat versus okay, let me just remind myself, look, there's not a tiger here. You're safe, you're safe, you're safe. And it's not that I don't think that dialogue, that inner dialogue can be helpful, but I think for most people, they've probably had that experience of recognizing, well, I'm telling myself this, but I don't feel it in my body.
Oh, yeah. I hear that from clients all the time. I did this the other day. Did I tell you the story? I went to Legoland with my kids.
Okay.
I am not first of all, I didn't know there were rides at Legoland. I thought it was Legos. So
You're
where
like,
are we?
wait a second.
I need to
Can I get my money back?
recalibrate my understanding. I am not, for obvious reasons, I am not a rides person. My nervous system
Right.
cannot handle that. I went on a roller coaster. I've tried them. The last time I was probably 15 years ago, and I'm not kidding. I could not walk for 2 days after because I tensed my body so
Right.
tight that I was I was sore. So anyway, I am not a rides person, and my kids are young. They're 3 and 6. So I realize there are rides. I promise I will get back to what you were saying. And
No, I want to hear, and I'm invested.
we were waiting in line for what I thought was a virtual reality experience. For some reason, that was my understanding. In retrospect, this was obviously my fault, but I thought we were waiting for a virtual reality experience. So you wait in line for a long time, and then you get to this room where you get to make a spaceship. They give you a little tablet, and you design the spaceship, which is encouraging this idea that we're about to go on a virtual reality ride. They're saying, you're on a mission, you need to build your spaceship, then you're going to get on the spaceship. So we got on the spaceship that's moving very slowly. We're watching on the screen in front of us a reflection of ourselves in the spaceship. Okay? So everything up until this point is reinforcing this is a virtual reality ride. We made our spaceship. We got in the spaceship.
Right.
We are seeing a reflection of ourselves in the spaceship we made. Then you round a corner on the ride and you drop into a pitch black roller coaster. It just completely changed. We were moving at the speed of a sloth, having fun, making our spaceship. You round the corner and a door opens and you fall into a full-blown roller coaster in the pitch black.
This is not
It was
right.
not right. I immediately, so instinctively, first of all, first thing I do is scream my head off. I have my 3-year-old on one side, my 6-year-old on the other, and I'm just screaming my head off. But interspersed between my screaming, I'm grabbing both of them physically as if they don't have, I literally am so scared that I forget they have harnesses on, and I believe it's my responsibility to hold them. So I'm holding them in, thinking that I am the person holding them in.
The only thing standing in between them and
imminent
harm.
death is me.
It's
So
you.
I'm holding them in and screaming, "You're safe! You're safe! You're safe! You're safe! You're safe!" And then
Totally.
screaming, holding them, and then trying to tell them, "You're safe! You're safe!" And afterwards, when we got off the ride and we survived, I started cracking up. I was like, "That's where my clients get stuck." Is they're
Totally.
asking themselves, I'm telling myself I'm safe the whole day.
Right.
Why isn't it doing anything?
Totally. But I'm doing it from a place of threat. Why am I so activated?
Why isn't it working?
You're safe. I know. I actually had a client last week where we were on a virtual session and her dog started. By the way, I love when clients have pets in session. I'll just say, and I can probably speak for most therapists, like bring your animal into the session. But this dog could hear something out in the hall, right? It's the mailman, but the dog is like, uh-oh, there's a threat out there. And it was so interesting because this client has struggled with the same thing. How do I make myself feel safe? But I watched her intuitively with this dog, and she didn't try to forcefully tell, hey, you're safe. Come on, you're safe. She didn't do that. She didn't try to logic with it, like, hey, that's actually just the postman, right? Because that's not going to work with the dog. It doesn't know. She was petting the dog, making soothing, reassuring sounds, regulating her own experience, and that communicated safety to the dog. And I am like, you already know how to do this. You actually know how to do this. But it's so easy when you're wired this way to think, I'll be able to think my way into it or talk my way into it versus, no, it's actually like feeling our way into it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story. So I want to hear more. So how do you translate this other than a really helpful dog just on call to help demonstrate exactly what you're talking about? When you're with a
Right.
client, how do you help them develop safety in their body that's not exclusively language-based, cognitive-based?
That's cognitive. So there's so many, this is the cool thing about it. There are so many different ways. And I think those of us wired this way, it's just so beneficial to know about some of these ways so that we can practice them throughout the day, where it's like we can notice, we can bring awareness. Oh, okay. I can tell that I'm in the threat state. What can I do right now that will help communicate safety, help move out of threat state into social safety? And so one of my favorite ones, and people who are listening, you're obviously not going to be able to see, but I'll describe it for you. It's called the Big 3+1, which is the most ridiculous name. And I love doing it with clients because I love saying the name, and it's so silly, but it's so effective. And so I'll explain what it is, and I'll explain a little bit about why it works. So the Big 3+1, the +1 is being able to kind of lean back, sit down and lean back. Because when we're in threat, we are going to have a tendency to constrict, right? Like that it's just biological, that we will hunch our shoulders, our chest will get tighter. And so one way to communicate safety and the absence of threat is we kind of lean back in our chair, like we're just like relaxing. And so even if you don't feel relaxed, that's okay, because we're using our body to communicate safety to our nervous system. And we can actually just utilize that versus, again, that cognitive piece. So we're sitting down and leaning back if we can. And then, yeah, we can both, for anyone watching, we'll do it. But we're leaning back, and then the big three are, the first one is we're going to do an eyebrow wag. So for older people, we're like Magnum PI, but like we're just like doing a quick like raise and lower our eyebrows. That's it. So
Okay, that I can do.
okay. And we're going to take a deep breath together. And then we're going to do what's called a wide mouth cooperative grin.
I'm sorry, what?
I know. It's a mouthful. And every time I do it with a client, by the end, we're just like laughing like this because you feel so silly. But actually laughing is a really powerful way to engage our social safety system, right? Because that's a way of communicating, okay, there's not a predator here. We're here and we're laughing, we're safe. So the wide mouth cooperative grin, it's kind of what it sounds, where it's like we're grinning together, closed mouth though. And that's it. It's just those things, the wide mouth cooperative grin, the eyebrow wag, and the deep breath. Even if because why they say the +1, sometimes you'll be places where you can't easily sit down and just sort of throw your shoulders back. But we kind of always have the ability to take a deep breath with a long, slow exhale, to do a little eyebrow wag, and to just do the grin. And it's so interesting. It's part of why it works is that these muscles around our eyes and our mouths, they are communicating with our vagus nerve. And that vagus nerve, when that engages, that's that rest and digest mode. That is that communication to our nervous system. Okay, we're safe here. And when people are chronically in threat, the ability of our vagus nerve to engage becomes impaired. And so any little thing like that where we are helping it get better at engaging, it's just so beneficial.
I love that. Anyone on an airplane is going to be watching me do the big 3+1.
That you're just going to be like,
rounds
they're
of
like
them, rep after rep after rep. So many cooperative grins coming the flight attendants'
so
way.
many cooperative grins. They're like, why is that lady like raising and lowering her eyebrows?
I love that. And it's simple, it's accessible, it's repeatable. I also like that it, unlike meditation or somatic tracking, which I also love for different reasons, it's eyes open. It's not adding the intensity of it's using your body without being in your body in a focused way. And I think people need to add those. We need to talk about those more in our rotation, because there's a lot of emphasis in our field on using the body by using the sensations in your body, the sensation of your breath, the sensation of your anxiety, the sensation of your pain or your dizziness. And I do think there's a place for that, and it can be really effective, but it can add a lot of intensity. And what you just shared is so simple. It's impossible to be intense when you're eyebrow wagging.
You just like this. I feel ridiculous, but that you're so right that it's, especially when people have a fraught relationship with their bodies because they've had a lot of symptoms. Even though I love somatic tracking and I think it's so helpful, it can be intense. Mm-hmm. It's a lot when you've had that relationship with your body. And actually even doing some of these things before you do somatic tracking, so that you're already coming more into that social safety system versus being in threat, it can really help when you're doing somatic tracking.
That's a great tip. I love that. Another thing I wanted to make sure to ask you about along the lines of developing self-compassion and using your body to down-regulate is something that you call your loving kindness practice.
Oh, yes.
Can we
yes.
Hear about that?
So this is what's so interesting that they've found about people who are biotemperamentally wired this way, over-controlled kind of coping style, is, well, this is not going to be surprising to probably anyone listening. We tend to be really hard on ourselves. And that's for so many reasons. I mean, it truly is, it's an adaptation. But that's one where it's really hard to address neuroplastic pain when we're chronically hard on ourselves, because our nervous system cannot tell if the call's coming from inside the building, right? It's like if you had somebody, a really mean boss, walking around being like, nothing you ever do is good enough, blah, 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 blah. Of course you would feel in a chronic threat state. And it's not different when it's happening internally. And so, and this for me has been, you know this, but it's been such a huge part of my personal journey of healing, of trying to figure out, okay, I know that I need to change my relationship to myself to be more kind. But that's another one that's so similar to like what you were describing on the ride, where it's so easy to get looped into, like, why am I so hard on myself? I'm such a jerk. Like, I should know better than this. And now I'm being hard on myself, on and on and on, right? And that wiring is so strong to relate to ourselves in that way. And so what they've found, there's just such a substantial body of research now that people who are wired this way benefit tremendously from loving kindness practice, with such an important caveat of how you're going about it. Because I think a lot of times what people will hear is, okay, you can do this loving kindness practice, and they'll work on imagining themselves or a younger version of themselves. And what they say with over control is, no, this is not the way that we're going to do it, because oftentimes that makes people feel worse. And what you want to choose is somebody, and this could be a human, it could be a pet, it could be somebody living, somebody dead, but it needs to be somebody different than you that you're practicing with. Somebody for whom it's just easy to feel those feelings And you never have to it actually doesn't matter whether you eventually kind of turn it back inward in terms of how you're practicing. It's enough to just do it for somebody for whom it's easy to really build up those neural pathways.
So what would that look like, practically speaking?
Practically speaking, so for me, when I started doing this, I wasn't a mom yet, but I had an 18-month-old niece. And it was just so easy to feel love and affection towards her. You know, I think sometimes with a baby or a toddler, when people get older, obviously relationships get more complicated, but never with a baby are you thinking, what have you done for me? I mean, hopefully. You're just like, this little being is just so delightful. Like, I just love them as they are. There's nothing about anything that they've accomplished or done for me. It's just effortless. And she was like that for me, where I could just think of her and it would make me feel so warm and loving. It was just very accessible. So I would spend, and I did use my over control to help me with this. I committed that I was going to do this for a year. Nobody has to start there, but I was like, I could tell that this was at the root of so much for me that I needed to really address this if I was going to get feeling better. And so I would spend 5 minutes every day imagining my niece, Nora, and imagining sending her things that I knew I myself probably needed to hear, but I didn't worry about imagining myself. So I would say in my mind, when I would think of her, may you love and accept yourself as you are. I would say, this is one of my favorite loving kindness phrases, but I would say, may you know that you have the inner resources to meet this moment as it unfolds. And that was because I was so used to living kind of in that planning, hypervigilant mode of, okay, if I don't get everything figured out, the wheels are going to come off. And I need to always be thinking into the future and anticipating and embracing and just being able to send that wish to her of something that I would say is more akin to resilience, of this reminder of you already have everything that you need inside of you. You can meet life as it unfolds. You don't need to plan everything. But it could be just the traditional phrases too, which are, may you be happy, may you be at ease, may you be safe. It's not even particularly important what the phrases are, but it is just spending maybe even just those 5 minutes practicing with that feeling of that kind of love that's not based on performance.
Mm-hmm. It's the sweetest idea. And can you share a little bit about what is actually happening in the brain, the nervous system, or the body when someone is sending that loving kindness to their niece, to their dog, to their loved one? What's happening?
You are using what we know about neuroplasticity to rewire your brain, because our poor brains, they require so much energy to run, and they are so evolved for just like pure base survival, right? Like what I say to clients all the time is, Mother Nature is indifferent to your happiness, unless it's going to help you like spread your DNA. The happiness piece is just not that important. And so if it's hard for you to access, that is not your fault. Like that's a feature of our evolutionary wiring. It's not a bug. It's not a just you issue. And to access some of these other ways of being, it actually just it does require practice. It's not because of something that's wrong with you. But what it does, that practice over time, is strengthen those neural pathways so that when we are having a hard time, it becomes more accessible to turn it inward. Where the default, when people are under stress, I mean, you and I both know this. It's not like when you work on laying down these new neural pathways, it is going to be the case that when we're under stress, our brain is going to try to just default to the most well-worn ones. It's not like those just get erased or anything, but the more that we can strengthen the beneficial ones over time, that becomes more and more accessible, even when we're under stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a helpful reminder of how much practice it really takes. It is nearly identical to learning a new language. For anyone who has learned a
Totally.
second language as an adult or later in childhood, it takes so much practice. Like you are breaking it down sentence by
Totally.
sentence, verb conjugation by verb conjugation until it becomes a little bit more natural, a little bit more normal, until it rolls off your tongue. You start dreaming in that language. And under stress, you're always going to want to default to your home language.
Totally. Yes, yes. That is like, we never want to be hard on ourselves for that. It's more about getting better and better, recognizing, oh, my brain's gone down that most well-worn neural pathway. That's okay. I don't need to waste any time beating myself up about that. But like, can we bring it back to something that's more helpful and adaptive?
I love this so much. I always think of you as the queen of self-compassion. I have taken so many things that you've said over the years and pocketed them and truly never forgotten them. And I could listen to you talk about the theory all day, but I know that you have such a special way of translating the theory into a meaningful practice in your clients' lives. Like, this is not something that you preach as theoretically important. Like, I know you actually do these things in your everyday life. I know they were so profoundly transformational for you. And you can just feel that coming off of you. It's a really, I know that this is in your core now.
And I was not like this. You know, that this was something that changed for me. And I would say, you've probably heard me say it, but I feel like self-compassion practice, loving kindness meditation, it saved my life. Like it so profoundly changed my life. And I 100% believe that this and developing a tolerance for uncertainty, because one thing about being overcontrolled is that we tend to interpret, or our nervous systems interpret, uncertainty as threat. Like, we don't like it.
No, really, no.
And growing our ability to be compassionate with ourselves and to be able to tolerate and be with uncertainty, to me, those are like the two biggest gifts that we can give ourselves.
Oh, I love it so much. Thank you so much for being willing to come on today. And is there any last wondering tip, piece of hope that you would share with someone who's listening, for whom this information is new, who's resonating for the first time with this idea of, oh, I am biotemperamentally wired this way, who might be experiencing a mix of things, some validation, some nervousness, some wondering of, can I change this if it's just how I am? Is there any last message that you'd want to share with someone who's sorting through that?
Yeah, I would say, if you're listening and you tend to notice any kind of like threat response to what I'm saying of, oh, does this mean this is my destiny? Absolutely not. Because wow, once we have awareness of, this is why I'm like this, then we can stop fighting so much against it, and sort of have the frame shift to, how do I best support my nervous system? And really knowing this doesn't have to be like, oh my goodness, what else can you add into your day? Can you be more productive about this? And what are you doing to try to shift your nervous system out of threat? But more like knowing, okay, so I'm wired this way, and so I'm going to have to do things. It's going to be helpful to me to practice every day just little things to communicate to my nervous system, hey, we're safe. And truly, those things can be so simple. Even like going to a mirror and making like silly faces, like stretching your face. I know. It sounds so ridiculous, but it's, again, like those muscles around our eyes and mouth. When we're doing that, it's just such a simple and accessible way to communicate. Oh, like, we're not going to be doing those things if we're getting chased by a tiger. Oh, I'm making silly faces. No. So it's just a bottom up approach to let our nervous system know, okay, you're actually safe right now. And just kind of thinking, okay, this is a gift I can give to myself, right? Of finding these little ways in the day to let my nervous system know, hey, well, let me give you a nudge. Just a reminder. I'm going to just do this thing to let you know we're safe. It's such a helpful way to kind of have it shift more and more over time, communicating that message, we're safe, in a different way that I think is much more readable to our nervous system than language.
Yes. It feels amazing to hear you say that. It really is so hopeful, this messaging.
Yes, totally. That you're like, oh my God, please hear this as something very hopeful, because this is something that we can just really, in an accessible way, be working on.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I so appreciate that you came on today. I learned so much. I would keep you here for another 3 hours if I could. And anyone who knows you knows you are truly just love in every cell of your body. Anyone who knows Danielle, she just believes in the goodness of all people. It's in her pores, it's in her DNA at this point. It pours out of her. And I'm so happy that listeners got a little taste of that today.
That is so sweet. I mean, I feel the same way about you.
This was so fun. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thank you so much for having me on to talk about it. I love to share about this.